You're walking past an old asylum, brick and limestone, Gothic windows, iron gates rusted shut. You think, mental hospital, Victorian-era psychiatry, primitive treatments. Now forget what you think you know. Imagine those people weren't insane. Imagine they were institutionalized for remembering something. Something true. Something impossible. Something about the world before 1850 that wasn't supposed to be remembered. By 1890, there were over 2 million people in asylums across North America and Europe. An explosion. An epidemic of madness, they called it. But what if it wasn't madness? What if it was memory? It starts in a basement. It always starts in a basement. New York State Archives, Albany. Winter, 2019. I'm looking for something else entirely. Immigration records. Ellis Island manifests. Wrong floor. Wrong wing. I push through a door that shouldn't have been unlocked. Asylum records. Boxes and boxes. The smell hits first. Mildew. Old leather bindings. Something sweet and rotten underneath. The boxes are labeled by institution. Hudson River State Hospital, Willard Asylum, Utica Psychiatric Center, dates running from 1865 to 1920. I pull a box at random. Willard Asylum for the Chronic Insane, 1887. 1889. The intake forms are handwritten, beautiful copperplate script that takes time to decipher. Name, age, occupation, reason for commitment, standard stuff. Then I see it. Patient speaks of great buildings of white stone that made the air different. Claims these structures were everywhere before the war, describes elaborate water systems and air channels and walls, insists modern construction is primitive by comparison. Diagnosis, delusional disorder, with grandiose architectural fixation. One patient, one form. I keep reading. Patient maintains the old cities were brought down deliberately, describes watching demolition crews destroy perfectly sound structures in childhood, claims his father was a keeper of the old knowledge, who was silenced. Diagnosis, paranoid psychosis with persecuting delusions. Another, patient, aged 54, former stonemason, committed by family, refuses to accept modern building methods as proper construction, insists he learned his trade in the old way before the change, describes cutting stone according to harmonic frequencies and resonant dimensions, becomes agitated when told such methods are impossible. Diagnosis, occupational monomania with reality detachment. I sit back. The basement is cold. The fluorescent light flickers. 3 patients, 3 different intake dates, 3 variations on the same impossible claim. They remembered buildings that shouldn't have existed. I drive to Willard 3 weeks later. February. The lake is frozen. The asylum complex sits on a hill overlooking the water. Massive, sprawling, Gothic revival architecture with something older underneath. The main building is boarded up now, condemned. But the stonework is still visible. I walk the perimeter with a measuring tape and a camera. The foundation stones are enormous, granite blocks, some of them 12 feet long, fitted with precision that makes the upper Victorian brick look amateur by comparison. I run my hand along the seams. No mortar in the lower courses. The stones are cut to interlock, weight distributed across angles that prevent shifting. This wasn't Victorian construction. I photographed the joints. The precision is wrong for 1869, the asylum's official construction date. The tolerances are too tight. We're talking variations measured in millimeters across stones that weigh several tons each. Then I notice the channels, carved into the foundation blocks, running vertically and horizontally, are narrow channels maybe 4 inches wide, 2 inches deep. They connect at precise angles, forming a network through the stonework. The official architectural plans, available through the County Historical Society, don't mention them. I measure the channel depth at multiple points. Exactly the same. The width exactly the same. The angles where they intersect, 90 degrees, 60 degrees, 30 degrees, geometric precision. An orderly who's worked here for 30 years sees me measuring. He's curious, not hostile. You know what those are? I ask, pointing to the channels. He shrugs. Drainage, maybe? Old ventilation system? Building's been here forever. Nobody remembers. These go through the foundation. I say, drainage doesn't go through foundation stones. He looks closer. I can see him thinking. Then he shakes his head. Above my pay grade. Place has always been weird, though. Sounds at night, humming. Could be pipes, could be wind, could be the old patients my grandmother used to say. She worked here. Her mother did, back in the 20s. Said the old-timers, the ones who'd been here since before 1900, they all talked about the building remembering, like it was alive or something. Crazy talk. He pauses, but the humming's real. You hear it at night when the wind's right. I thank him and keep measuring. The channels run in patterns. Not random. They form a grid through the foundation, aligned to cardinal directions, north-south, east-west, and the intersections occur at regular intervals, every 12.8 feet. Why 12.8 feet? Why these specific angles? Why carve channels through foundation stones for an asylum in 1869, unless the asylum wasn't built in 1869? Unless it was built on something that was already there. Utica Psychiatric Center, 1843 supposedly. Older than Willard. I drive there in March. Rain. The building is even more Gothic, more in towers, arched windows, the whole Victorian psychiatric aesthetic. I walk the grounds with permission from the Historical Preservation Society. They're curious why anyone cares about foundation stones. The lower courses are the same. Massive granite blocks, precision fitted, no mortar. Channels carved through them in geometric patterns. Same width, same depth as Willard. I measure the intervals, 12.8 feet. Exactly. I stand there in the rain, measuring tape in hand, and the impossibility settles in. Two asylums, built 26 years apart, 150 miles from each other, sitting on foundations with identical geometric channel patterns, spaced at identical intervals. The Preservation Society director, a woman in her 60s with an archaeology degree, comes out to see what I'm doing. "What are these channels for?" I ask. "She's been working here for 20 years. "We don't know," she says. "The blueprints from 1843 don't show them. We think they were already here. The asylum was built incorporating an older structure, maybe a fort, maybe something from the colonial period. Colonial builders carved precision channels through granite foundation blocks." She doesn't have an answer. I show her my photographs from Willard. She stares at them, looks at the Utica foundations, looks back at the photographs. "That's impossible," she says quietly. "I know. Same measurements. Exactly the same." She walks along the foundation, running her hand over the channels like I did. "We found patient records from the 1850s, she says slowly. "Some of them talk about the building, about how it felt wrong or remembered things. We always thought they were just, mentally ill." "Can I see those records?" She brings me to the archive room. Leather-bound intake ledgers, patient histories, doctor's notes. Patient becomes distressed when housed in South Wing, claims the walls speak and remember suffering. Insists the building is older than they say, and was repurposed from its true function. When asked what that function was, patient describes healing through resonance and air that carries medicine. Diagnosis: auditory hallucinations with architectural delusion. Another patient, former carpenter, age 61, committed 1856, refuses to work in asylum workshop, states the building offends him because it misuses the old structure beneath. Claims he worked on similar buildings in his youth before they were torn down. Describes channels in the stone that conducted specific frequencies for health maintenance. Becomes violent when told such things are impossible. Diagnosis: violent monomania with technological delusion. I photograph the pages. The director watches me. "You think they were remembering something real," she says. "I think two asylums built decades apart on foundations with identical engineering that shouldn't exist in either period is worth investigating." She nods slowly. "There are others, other asylums from this era. All over New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, all built the same way. We assumed it was just the Victorian psychiatric architecture movement. Big institutions, Gothic style. But if the foundations are all, I need to see them," I say. April: the trees are budding. Hudson River State Hospital is a ruin now. Massive Victorian complex, abandoned since 2003. The main building is accessible, if you're careful. I'm careful. The foundation is the same. Granite blocks, channels, patterns. I measure 12.8 feet. But here, I find something new. The channels aren't just carved into the stone. They're lined with a thin layer of copper that's turned green with age. The copper is embedded into grooves within the channels. Precision metal work inside precision stonework. I photograph it from every angle. The copper is original, oxidized to the same degree as the stone is weathered. This wasn't added later. Why copper lining in stone channels in an asylum foundation? I explore the basement. There are more channels here, visible where walls have collapsed. They run through the floor, up into the walls, branching and connecting like a circulatory system through the entire structure. In one room, I find graffiti, old graffiti, scratched into plaster that's falling away in sheets. The building knows. It remembers the healers. "We are not mad, 1891. Below it, in different handwriting. "They put us here because we remember. GW. Patient 4,721 inches, and below that, barely visible. Father said the old city sang. He wasn't lying. They locked him here. Then me, 1887. I stand in that ruined room for a long time, camera in hand, reading the words of people declared insane more than a century ago. What did they remember? Back in Albany, I start pulling records systematically. Asylum construction and expansion in the United States and Canada, 1850, 1900. The numbers are staggering. 1850, 37 asylums, total capacity approximately 11,000 patients. 1870, 174 asylums, capacity 186,000 patients. 1880, 290, 8 asylums, capacity 674,000 patients. 1890, 440, 100 and faces, capacity 2,141 asylums, capacity 2,100,000 patients, an increase of over 2 million institutionalized patients in 40 years. The official explanation: industrialization, urbanization, immigration, poverty, better diagnosis of mental illness. But I start reading the diagnostic categories from that period. The terms they used: reality detachment, historical delusion, temporal disorientation, architectural monomania, structural memory disorder. These aren't general psychiatric terms. They're specific. They describe specific types of delusions, delusions about buildings, about history, about the old world. I find a medical journal from 1887, published in Philadelphia, an article by Dr. Edmund Clark titled "The Epidemic of Architectural Delusion Among the Lower Classes." He describes it as a curious phenomenon affecting primarily immigrants and older laborers who insist that modern construction methods are inferior to those of previous generations and that great structures were systematically destroyed in recent decades. Dr. Clark attributes this to nostalgia disorder combined with resentment of industrial progress and recommends firm institutional correction, but he lists symptoms, and the symptoms are detailed. Patients describe buildings made of white or creamstone with carved channels for air and water, geometric precision impossible with modern tools, structures that produced beneficial frequencies, demolition of sound buildings for no clear reason, families who spoke of the old knowledge, punishment for speaking about what came before. These aren't random delusions. This is specific. This is pattern. May. Warm. The hospital is still operating, but the old section from 1859 is preserved as a historical building. I photograph the foundation. Same stones, same channels, same measurements. 12.8 feet. The hospital archivist, a historian named Patricia Chen, gives me access to old patient records after I explain what I'm researching. "You're not the first," she says. "We had a researcher here in the 90s looking at the same thing. She was writing about Victorian psychiatric practices, but she kept getting distracted by the patient testimonies, said they all sounded the same. What happened to her research? Never published. She stopped responding to emails. I tried to follow up a few years later. Her university said she'd moved overseas, didn't leave a forwarding address. She brings me boxes of intake forms and patient correspondence. The letters are heartbreaking. My dearest Margaret, they say I am mad because I speak of what Father taught me. I am not mad. The cities were real, the buildings sang. I heard them as a child before the demolitions. Father said we must not forget, even when they make us forget. They brought me here for remembering. Please believe me, I am not mad. Your loving brother, Thomas. January 1870. 6 another. To my son, if you receive this, know that I spoke truth. The old world was real. I worked on those structures as an apprentice. I cut stone according to the harmonic measurements my master taught me. When I refused to use inferior methods, they called me mad. Perhaps I am mad to insist on truth when lies are safer, but you deserve to know. Your grandfather was a builder in the old tradition. They erased that tradition. They institutionalized those who remembered. Your father, Heinrich, August 1882. I read dozens of these letters. They were never sent. They remained in the hospital files, labeled patient correspondence, delusional content. Patricia watches me read them. They all say the same thing, she says quietly. Different words, different backgrounds, different years, but the same story. Something about before, something about buildings, something about being silenced. Do you think they were crazy? She doesn't answer immediately. Then I think the foundations of this building are impossibly precise for 1859. I think the channels in the stone serve no function I can identify. I think 2 million people in asylums by 1890 is a lot of people, and I think these letters are too specific, too consistent, to be random delusions. She pauses. But I'm an archivist, not a psychiatrist. What do I know? Buffalo State Asylum, New York. June. I'm driving across upstate New York now, following the asylum trail. Buffalo State Asylum. 1880. Kirkbride design. Long wings radiating from a central administrative building. The foundation. Granite blocks. Copper-lined channels, 12.8-foot intervals. But here, the channels aren't just in the foundation, they run up through the walls. I can see them where renovations have exposed the interior structure. Narrow copper-lined channels rising from the foundation through the brickwork, branching into smaller channels that spread through the entire building. It's a system, a network. I hire a local engineer to bring ground-penetrating radar. We scan the foundation. The channels extend below ground level. They go down at least 20 feet, deeper than any asylum foundation should go. They branch into a subsurface network that spreads beyond the building footprint. The engineer, a man named James, who's worked on historic building preservation for 30 years, stares at the radar images. "This is older than 1880, he says. "This is older than anything in Buffalo. This is foundation work from, I don't know. This is engineering that doesn't make sense." Why? Because you don't build like this for an asylum. You don't need channels this precise, this extensive, this deep for a mental hospital. This is infrastructure for something else, something that required exact geometric spacing, exact depth, exact material composition. What? He shakes his head. I have no idea, but it wasn't for housing mentally ill patients. This was designed for something specific, something technical. I show him the measurements from Willard, Utica, Hudson River, Philadelphia. He stares at the numbers. They're all the same, he says. All of them. Same spacing, same dimensions, same materials. How is that possible? What if the asylums were built on top of existing structures? What structures that 2 million people remembered? Structures they were institutionalized for remembering. He looks at me for a long moment. You're saying these asylums were built to house people who knew what these foundations really were. I'm saying it's a possibility worth investigating. He nods slowly, still looking at the radar images. I worked on a restoration project at the old Chicago courthouse 15 years ago. We found the same thing. Granite foundation blocks, copper channels, geometric patterns. Went down 30 feet. We couldn't explain it. The architect said it must be some Victorian innovation nobody documented. But it was there before the courthouse. We were building on top of it. Did you publish that finding? We tried. The journal rejected it, said it was speculative and unsupported by historical documentation. We dropped it. Do you still have the measurements? In storage somewhere? I could look. Please. Summer. I extend the search to Canada and Europe. Montreal. The Long Point Asylum, built 1873. Same foundations. Same channels. Same intervals. Toronto. The Provincial Lunatic Asylum, built 1850. Same engineering. London. The Middlesex County Asylum, built 1831. Same stonework. Same precision. Same copper-lined channels running through impossible foundations. Berlin. The Charité Psychiatric Facility, expanded in 1868. Same patterns. Vienna. The Lower Austrian Regional Asylum, built 1869. Same foundation network. I'm measuring the same structure in 7 countries across 2 continents. This wasn't regional. This wasn't cultural. This wasn't architectural fashion. This was systematic. This was coordinated. This was global. And it existed before the asylums were built on top of it. I collect patient records from every asylum I visit. The testimonies are consistent. From London, 1879, patient insists she remembers great white buildings throughout the city before the demolitions of the 40s. Claims these structures maintained the air quality and prevented disease. States her grandmother was a keeper who knew how to tune the buildings for optimal health effects. Diagnosis: grandiose delusion with obsessive architectural fixation. From Berlin, 1885, patient, aged 67, former metalworker, describes his apprenticeship in the old workshops where they shaped copper according to harmonic principles for installation in the city structures. Claims this knowledge was suppressed after reunification and that he was warned not to speak of it. Became agitated and was committed after persisting in public demonstrations of obsolete techniques. Diagnosis: technological monomania with paranoid features. From Vienna, 1891, patient maintains that her father was a builder of the old empire who worked on the frequency towers throughout Austria-Hungary. Describes these structures as white stone spires that sang at certain hours. Insists they were systematically dismantled in her childhood. Claims her father was silenced for refusing to participate in demolitions. Diagnosis: inherited delusional disorder. From Montreal, 1876, patient speaks of the harmonious city that existed before the burning. Describes elaborate stone buildings with carved channels that carried pure air. States his grandfather maintained one such building. and taught him the frequencies of health, was committed after refusing modern medical treatment and insisting the old buildings healed better than doctors. Diagnosis. Medical delusion with architectural obsession. The pattern is too consistent. Different languages, different countries, different decades. Same story. Buildings that healed, structures that maintained air quality. Systems that operated on geometric and harmonic principles. Knowledge that was suppressed. Families that were silenced, and 2 million people institutionalized for remembering it. I examine the psychiatric terminology of the period more carefully. The diagnostic categories used most frequently for these patients. Architectural monomania, obsessive focus on buildings and construction, temporal disorientation disorder. Confusion about historical timelines, structural memory delusion. False memories about buildings, harmonic fixation. Obsessive discussion of frequencies and resonance. Systemic persecution complex. Belief in coordinated suppression. Inherited knowledge disorder, claiming to possess information from previous generations. These aren't standard psychiatric terms. These are specific categories created to describe specific delusions. Delusions about architecture, about history, about suppressed knowledge, about inherited information, about systematic erasure. I find an 1889 psychiatric manual published in New York titled Classification of Modern Mental Disorders. It dedicates an entire chapter to delusions of the lost world. The author, Dr. Silas Merrick, describes this as a peculiar form of madness affecting primarily the lower and immigrant classes, characterized by persistent belief in a technologically superior past that has been deliberately erased. He lists symptoms: insistence on precision measurements in construction, descriptions of vanished structures, claims of family knowledge about old building methods, resistance to modern construction techniques, belief in coordinated demolition programs, reports of institutional punishment for speaking about the old ways, emotional distress when confronted with modern buildings. Dr. Merrick recommends immediate institutionalization for such patients, stating they are dangerous to social progress and must be isolated to prevent the spread of these delusions to susceptible populations. The manual was distributed to asylums across North America and Europe. It provided a framework for diagnosing and institutionalizing people who remembered. August. Heat. The hospital is abandoned now, scheduled for demolition. I explore before it's gone. The foundation is the same. But in the basement, I find something new. Inscriptions carved into the granite blocks themselves, not patient graffiti, carved deeply into the stone, professional work, mathematical formulas, geometric diagrams, measurements in units I don't recognize. I photograph everything. One block has a diagram showing a cross-section of a wall with channels at specific intervals. Arrows indicate flow direction. Numbers mark angles and depths. Another block has what looks like a frequency chart, wavelengths, amplitudes, resonant points. A third has architectural drawings of a dome structure with precise mathematical annotations. These aren't decorations. These are technical specifications, and they're carved into the foundation stones of an asylum built in 1877. Who carved them? When? Why? I find a partial inscription near the floor. Repository of the old knowledge. May those who come after remember what we were forced to forget. 1868, below it in different handwriting. They called us mad for remembering. But the stones remember too. 1883. I sit in that basement for an hour, surrounded by carved stone that remembers engineering we're not supposed to know existed. I start searching for demolition records from the 1850s to 1890s. What were they tearing down to build these asylums? The records are fragmented. Many are missing, but what survives is telling. New York, 1867. Authorization granted for demolition of the Whitstone Public Health Complex to make way for Willard Asylum for the chronic insane, structure deemed obsolete and unsuitable for modern use. Philadelphia, 1858. Demolition order, the Resonance Institute Building Complex. Reason: outdated health facility incompatible with current medical understanding. Salvageable materials to be repurposed for construction of the Pennsylvania Hospital for the Insane. Boston, 1863. Authorization for dismantling of the Harmonic Wellness Towers. Reason: dangerous pseudoscientific infrastructure. Stone foundation to be incorporated into Worcester State Hospital. Whitestone. Resonance Institute. Harmonic Wellness. What were these places? I find a description in a Boston newspaper from 1862, written before the demolition. The so-called Harmonic Wellness Towers, relics of a bygone era of medical superstition, stand as monuments to ignorance. These structures, with their elaborate stone channels and geometric precision, were claimed to maintain health through architectural resonance, a notion now thoroughly discredited by modern science. The City Council has wisely voted for their removal. They existed. They were real structures, and they were demolished specifically to build asylums in their place. Buildings that supposedly maintained health through resonance, torn down and replaced with institutions to house people who claimed such buildings existed. September, autumn coming early, the asylum is partially preserved, partially ruins. I find more patient records in the Historical Society. Patient 3847, admitted 1888. My name is Sarah Whitfield. I am 43 years old. I am not insane. My father worked as a maintenance keeper at the old Capital Health structure in Montpelier. He taught me how to read the resonance channels, how to identify blockages, how to clear the copper lines. When I was a child, people came to these buildings when they were ill. The buildings helped them heal. I saw it. Then they tore them down. Father protested. They threatened him. He stopped speaking about it. But he taught me in secret. He said someone must remember. When the structures were demolished, people got sicker. The air changed. Disease spread. I tried to tell the town council. I showed them my father's notes about the channel systems, the harmonic frequencies, the geometric requirements. They called me mad. They brought me here. I am not mad. I am a witness. The old world was real. The buildings worked. They suppressed this knowledge deliberately. I will die here for remembering. But perhaps someone will read this one day. Perhaps someone will believe. The stones, no. The foundations, remember. We are not all mad. The intake form stamped over her statement. Diagnosis: severe architectural delusion with persecutory complex. Recommend permanent institutionalization. Sarah Whitfield died in the asylum in 1904, 16 years after admission. Her delusion was carved into the foundation stones of the very building that held her. I try to track down other researchers who investigated this pattern. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, historian, University of Pennsylvania, published articles on Victorian asylum construction in 1991. Research abruptly ceased. 1995. University records show she relocated overseas. No forwarding address, no subsequent publications. Professor James Halloway, architectural historian, Cambridge University, presented preliminary findings on anomalous foundation engineering in 19th century psychiatric facilities at a conference in 1988. Paper never published. Withdrew from academic work in 1989. Current whereabouts unknown. Dr. Sarah Chen, the Pennsylvania hospital archivist mentioned earlier. I try to contact her. No response. I call the hospital. She no longer works here. They won't say why or provide contact information. The researcher Patricia Chen mentioned from the 90s. I search academic databases. Nothing. No published work under her name after 1994. 4 researchers, all stopped investigating. All disappeared from academic record. The pattern of silencing didn't end in 1890. October, I return to Willard Asylum. I bring better equipment this time. Ground-penetrating radar, acoustic resonance detector, a frequency analyzer. The foundation channels aren't just carved stone. They're a system. I map the network. It extends 40 feet below ground level. It branches into the surrounding earth, connecting to similar channel systems in nearby structures, an old courthouse, a former grain mill, a demolished church foundation I find records of. This was a network. An infrastructure, city-wide, possibly county-wide. I set up the frequency analyzer at different points along the channel system. Even now, abandoned for decades, I detect low-frequency resonance in the stone. Baseline, 7.83 Hz. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural electromagnetic frequency. The channels are aligned to amplify it. The copper lining, the geometric spacing, the precise intervals, it's all designed to resonate at Earth's fundamental frequency. I test the acoustic properties. The channels carry sound in specific ways. Certain frequencies propagate clearly, others are dampened. The system is tuned. An engineer I've brought along, a woman named Dr. Rachel Kim, who specializes in acoustic architecture, runs her own tests. This is deliberate, she says. This is engineered for specific acoustic and electromagnetic properties. The spacing, the materials, the geometry. It's all calculated for resonance at precise frequencies. Could this affect health? Theoretically, there's research on the biological effects of extremely low-frequency electromagnetic fields. The Schumann resonance has been linked to circadian rhythms, neural function, general well-being. If you built a structure that amplified and distributed that frequency evenly, she trails off. It's theoretical. But if someone actually built this, actually achieved stable resonance distribution through architectural design, it would work. It might work. I'm not saying it did, but the engineering here is sophisticated enough that it might have worked. We stand in the autumn wind, looking at the foundations of an asylum built to house people who said the old buildings healed. The foundations of one of those old buildings is beneath us, carved with instructions, embedded with copper. designed for resonance, and 2 million people were institutionalized for remembering it existed. I sit in my research office, surrounded by photographs, measurements, patient testimonies, demolition records, asylum intake forms. The questions multiply. What were these structures really for? The evidence suggests health maintenance through architectural resonance, but we don't have complete structures to study. Only foundations. Only fragments. Only the testimonies of people declared insane. Who built them? The patients call it the Old World. They date it vaguely to before 1850. But the engineering suggests knowledge we're told didn't exist in that period. Precision stone cutting, harmonic engineering, electromagnetic understanding. Why were they demolished? Official records say, obsolete, dangerous, pseudoscientific. But what if they worked? What if free, architectural health maintenance threatened emerging pharmaceutical medicine? What if the knowledge threatened institutional control? Why were the rememberers institutionalized? 2 million people, across 2 continents, all diagnosed with variations of remembering the wrong history, all housed in buildings built on the foundations of what they remembered. The cruelty is precise. Who coordinated this? The demolitions happened simultaneously across countries. The asylum construction followed identical patterns. The diagnostic categories were standardized internationally. Someone organized this. Some institution. Some authority with global reach. Why does the suppression continue? The researchers who investigated disappeared. The records are fragmentary. Access to asylum basements is restricted. The foundations are scheduled for demolition. Someone is still protecting this secret. What else was erased? If global architectural health infrastructure was demolished and memory of it was institutionalized as madness, what else was forgotten? What else did the old world have that we're told never existed? Will we remember again? The stones remember. The copper remains. The frequencies still resonate in abandoned foundations. The patient testimonies survive in locked archives. We can measure what persists, but can we rebuild what was destroyed? Can we recover what was forbidden? I stand at Willard Asylum one final time. November. The first snow. The building is empty. The patients are long dead. The doctors are long dead. The families who committed their fathers and mothers and siblings for the crime of remembering, they're all gone. But the stones remain. The foundation blocks, precisely cut, copper-lined, geometrically perfect, still sit in the earth, still hum with faint resonance, still carry the carved instructions of builders we're not supposed to know existed. 2 million people were institutionalized by 1890. 2 million witnesses. 2 million voices silenced. They spoke of buildings that healed, structures that maintained air quality, systems that distributed beneficial frequencies, knowledge that was suppressed, families that were punished, infrastructure that was demolished and replaced with the very institutions that imprisoned them for remembering it. We called them mad, but their delusions are carved into the foundations of the asylums that held them. Their impossible memories are embedded in copper beneath our feet. Their false history can still be measured with modern instruments. They weren't mad, they were witnesses, and we erased them the same way we erased what they witnessed, systematically, globally, with medical authority and legal force. The official history says they were mentally ill, that the asylums cared for them, that the diagnoses were legitimate, that the treatments were appropriate, that the institutional expansion was necessary and humane. But the foundations argue back. The stones remember what the institutions tried to forget. Somewhere in a locked archive, more patient letters remain unread, more testimonies remain labeled delusional content, more evidence sits waiting for someone to believe it. Somewhere, a descendant carries a story passed down in whispers. Great-grandfather wasn't crazy. He knew something real. They locked him away for knowing. Somewhere beneath a modern structure, old foundations wait with their channels in copper and geometric precision, humming faintly at 7.83 Hz, resonating with the frequency of Earth itself, remembering what they were built to do. The old world was real. The buildings worked. 2 million people paid with their freedom for refusing to forget, and the stones, patient and silent, still carry the evidence of their truth. The asylum at Willard sits empty on its hill above Seneca Lake. The wind moves through broken windows. The foundation stones settle imperceptibly, as they have for decades, for centuries, for however long they've actually been there. In the basement, if you listen closely on quiet nights, some say you can hear it, the hum, the resonance, the memory of what buildings used to be. The patients heard it too. They wrote about it in letters that were never sent, in testimonies that were filed as delusions, in graffiti carved into walls of the rooms that held them. The building remembers, they said, and they were right. Perhaps that's what frightened their jailers most. Not that the patients were mad, but that they were sane. Not that they were delusional, but that they were witnesses. Not that they needed to be cured, but that they needed to be silenced. Because if 2 million people remembered the old world, How many more were there who remained silent, who learned to forget, who taught their children to never ask about the old buildings, the old knowledge, the old ways? How many of us carry that silence now, inherited across generations, not knowing what we're not supposed to remember? The foundations wait, the stones remember, the copper still conducts, and somewhere in basements and archives and forgotten corners of preserved institutions, the evidence remains, patient and persistent, ready for those with eyes willing to see what we were told never existed. The old world was real, they were not mad, and the truth, like frequency through stone, cannot be suppressed forever. It only waits to resonate again,